What is up, YouTube's Mountain Man Magic, and we're here to talk about my latest brew, which is this Mono Green Feast deck. Now, why is it Mono Green Feast? It's a great question, Internet. It's because everything in this deck is either helping us feast or is probably going to be feasted on in some way, shape, or form. Really, the only thing that's going to be feasted on is our 1-drop, which is the Gilded Goose. This is our ideal turn 1 play. It's going to help us do what Mono Green wants to do, which is ramp, play the biggest creatures, and just run over our opponent, feast on our opponent, really. We can see that it comes with a food token, which also goes on with, it's very on theme. Our turn 2 drops. If we can't play Gilded Goose and ramp into a 3-drop, our ideal turn 2 play is Paradise Druid, but we got Incubation Druid here as well, because it can also get bigger. It can be a threat later on. You know, it does adapting things. And then Wildborn Preserver has been a card that's really helped me out in a lot of situations. You can flash it in, it can just get huge and outscale our opponent. The cool thing about this deck is that we can outrace our opponent, we can outscale our opponent, we can out card draw our opponent sometimes. But this deck is just, it's just been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed playing it. So those are our 2-drops. Our 3-drop, which is also kind of our only other pseudo 1-drop, is Lovestruck Beast. We can create that human creature token, but if not, it's just a big 5/5 body for us. And then Yorvo is my favorite 3-drop in the deck. If you drop this thing on turn 2, especially if you're on the play, ooh, that's a big deal. That's hard to deal with, because most likely it's a 5/5 when you attack with it the next turn. And if your opponent can't remove it, that's unfortunate. If they're forced to use their board wipe to just get rid of 1 or 2 of your creatures, that's going to put you in a great situation. But Yorvo, big fan of this card. Then we have Vivian. For some reason, I'm on the fence about Vivian in this deck. She's worked out well in some situations, and in others, I feel like other people just assume she's going to be a huge threat, so they prioritize her over the creatures that are just going to run them over. But I digress. Vivian's in here, helps us flash stuff in. She's great. Nylea, they both have like very similar bow drawing. I just noticed that their bow draw form is quite similar. Nylea is clearly aiming a bit higher up. I digress. Nylea's here is great, helps us ramp, helps us just get cards in our hand that are meaningful if we start running out of gas. And it's a 5/6 indestructible creature for 4 mana. And hitting the devotion is not hard with stuff like Yorvo in the deck. And then Questing Beast is just a super pushed, obnoxious 4-drop. So, of course, we're going to play it. Shifting Ceratops is an amazing card against the Temur decks, Esper decks, anything that runs blue and wants to counter it. Too bad you can't do that. You can't bounce it with the fairy. You're just getting hit a lot. And then the mono red decks have a really hard time with this because it's a 5/4 and they usually just do 1, 2, or 3 damage to it. It's just really helpful. And then Wicked Wolf, because green's biggest struggle is often that removal. Wicked Wolf definitely helps us here. And those food tokens, which synergize well with Gilded Goose, can be really helpful where you drop it down, it can come in, it can eat the mono red cards, it can eat those Esper creatures. Like, it's just a really surprising card that a lot of people don't expect. Cavalier Thorns, another just big creature that's super useful. Nissa, we've all loved and or hated her throughout her time in Standard. And then my spice is 1 copy of Thorn Mammoth. Just sprinkle that in the deck. When this thing comes down, I think people forget that you can't chump block it because it has this thing called Trample, where it just tramples overs all those little 1/1s, and it just eats everything on your opponent's side of the board. If they got those 0/4 walls that they're trying to throw in front of you, not going to help you. Their 1/1 tokens, not going to help you. Thorn Mammoth is here to feast, my friends. And then my favorite card in this deck, which I probably played 2 copies, except every time I played it in Arena, I just had both in my starting hand. So I stopped playing with 2, just have 1. And this card is stupid good. If your opponent doesn't answer it or has a way to get it off the board, this card wins you the game flat out. It is just, it's obnoxiously good. Card draw, gaining life, making all your stuff even bigger than mono green already is, puts your opponent on a huge, very quick clock. But yeah, that's basically the deck tech. I have had a super fun time playing this thing. I really just threw it together. I tweaked it here and there after a few games, and then I've been on this huge winning streak with it. If you're on the play, honestly, the biggest advantage it has is that it just gets out of hand quickly. If you're on the draw, it can feel a little slow at times without the ideal starts, especially against mono red. It will get ran over if you're on the draw and you don't ramp out well. Those are probably my biggest tales, cautionary tales for you out there. But I've had a really fun time playing this thing. Honestly, none of the games I played, I even had Castle Garenbrig in it. I've somehow acquired 2 and didn't know or even bother to check. But you should have at least a couple of these in the deck. Point is, it's a really fun deck. You should definitely give it a try, especially if you already have a majority of the cards. If you do try it, let me know. If you have any tweaks for it, of course, let me know that as well in the comments. Love to hear your feedback on this bad boy. This is Mono Green Feast. Time to get into some gameplay. And honestly, I've just had a really fun time playing this deck. Now you can see this isn't the best starting hand, but we do have the 2-drop that we can let us ramp into a 4-drop. And then once we drop that, the Great Henge only costs us 4, which in my mind, if we can drop the Great Henge, then we're good to go. Even though we're playing against a deck that's going to have a ton of card draw against us, I expect, and get a ton of value out of their adventure mechanic. Who cares? We're mono green, and they're probably super salty right now that they can't counter this. I mean, I know I would be. They're like, who plays this thing? I'm going to unsummon your stupid Paradise Druid. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, it's too late. It's already too late. You're playing something like this. Terrible idea. I'm going to play my 4th Forest. The Great Henge is coming down. And then I can replay out my Paradise Druid and gain some life. We're just in a great spot here. Now, granted, they are going to get to draw a couple cards once they play the Fae of Wishes and do their thing with it. But when I see them pick Escape to the Wilds, I know we're in a pretty great spot here. Like, they're obviously not going to block because they need the card draw. So we've got on a pretty quick clock. And at this point, I don't think they're going to be able to catch up. Because as soon as next turn comes and they have nothing on board, they're probably not going to block our Paradise Druid if I decide to attack with that. We're going to have too much on the board for them to be able to wipe out or keep up with. So, like, really at this point, we're in the lead unless they come up with some board wipe that could destroy everything, like Storm of Wrath, I'm thinking would be a decent option. So I don't want to commit too heavily to the board. I'm pretty happy just playing my biggest thing and waiting, but then they scoop. So on to the next game. Now here, I'm not too sure what to expect. I'm thinking mono white. Depending on what we draw, we should be able to outramp them. Somehow I have the Great Henge in my starting hand yet again. That's just my classic arena situation as of late. Get in for some cheeky damage with our token. And then my hope is to just ramp into getting the Great Henge out early as we saw in the other game. Because again, if we get it down, we're good to go. Now I'm a little frightened that we're playing Esper because if they end up, what's the card? The Thought Erasuring out our Great Henge, then we're in a really sticky situation, but they don't. We play it down, and at this point I'm pretty happy. Now I do know that they have an ability to remove this in this deck, I assume, whether it's with the Banishing Light or trying to, I guess, set us back with Teferi and bouncing it. But I'm also on the mindset where we have them on a really quick clock that if they can't answer it, we're just going to beat them next turn. So even if they board wipe, Nissa is going to be a really tough challenge for us. I don't want to play it this turn, though, because if they do board wipe and we lose our land, then we're in a really tough situation. So here's me just drawing cards, playing stuff out, daring them to board wipe, you know, expecting them to board wipe. And for some reason, they're kind of waiting. If they had the board wipe, you'd think they use it. They don't. Cavalier Dawn, though, is a pretty interesting play. Big fan of that card. They give themselves the token. I just do some quick math here and realize if I play Nissa, turn a forest into a creature, we have lethal. They can't stop it. GG, and then on to the next one. Next up is another Timur battle, but this time we don't have the Great Henge, so I'm wondering, are we going to be able to win without it? Yes, of course, we're mono green. We don't get to ramp into Yorvo, but we still get to play him on turn 3 on the play, and I'm feeling pretty good, because their board wipe in the Timur deck does 4 damage. We're going to get it out of that striking range. I debate on playing the Wicked Wolf, but I think just getting Vivian down gives us some more options, although I was a little hesitant, like maybe they could counter it, but they don't. And then my thought is, too, if I can get really lucky, we could potentially flash in a 1-drop or 2-drop, and I realize I also have Paradise Druid. So if they do try to board wipe or do something like that, we can flash something in, save Yorvo, and I figure in this situation, we'll sacrifice the Gilded Goose. We still get to keep the token, and at this point, we don't really need the mana quite as much. Also, drawing our Shifting Ceratops is pretty nice here because, as they just acknowledge, that's a really nice play because they no longer can board wipe. Each creature is lethal damage, and it's going to be really hard to chump block and get enough board presence down to not just get demolished. So they play Wilderness Reclamation. I think, is it possible for them to stop this? And no, it's not. And I remember keeping this hand because I thought, is it possible for me to lose with this deck? Because I was on such a crazy winning streak that I kept a fairly bad starting hand. We get to flash in, or not flash in, but we get to play Vivian on turn 2, which can potentially be pretty nice. and I'm wondering, you know, maybe we can save it, because Cavalier of Thorns, it's not a legendary creature. If we can ramp into it, hey, not too bad. We found some more manas, but we need to draw actual lands. That's what has me really concerned, keeping a 2-lander without any actual ramp besides Gilded Goose in there. It's a very slow trudging through the game, and in Constructed Standard, probably not going to do very well for us. We lose Vivian, it makes me a little sad, and at this point I'm thinking, let's play Lovestruck Beast, and then we'll pass to allow us to get a food token with Gilded Goose, so that we're not falling behind on land. But if we do draw land, we can play Cavalier of Thorns, which I'd be a huge fan of, and fortunately we hit the land. That's all we needed. Now we've got our 5/6, he ramps us out, and come next turn we could be in a pretty good situation. Unfortunately though, when you're playing Timor, and we haven't really applied as much pressure as I would like, in my mind I'm thinking they have to have plenty of options to either stop us or slow us down to let them start doing their thing. So we got to try and at least put as much pressure on. When I see that unsummoned Questing Beast, that doesn't feel great, because we're trading away a Cavalier Thorns for their 3-drop. I'm thinking if we get the Shifting Ceratops back in our hand, can't be countered, can't be killed by most of their removal, at least on our turn, so we can get him for some good damage and maybe try and close the game out, although Lovestruck Beast is definitely going to put a damper on those plans. So plan B is to just try and maybe build out the board and get an alpha strike of sorts in. So we'll play Cavalier of Thorns, get as much mana down as possible so we can play multiple stuff. But I'm really starting to feel uneasy about this game because Timor wants a longer, grindier game. Then when they play the Great Henge, I realize, wow, we are really not feeling so hot here, because they also have access to this super good card. Don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Embercleave, and everyone plays it in everything. That it can, I mean, you should, because it's a really good card. We get our Great Henge back, but I'm feeling at this point it's probably too little, too late. Can't play it down because we don't have any big creatures to ramp it out, and I'm just trying to think, is there any way that I can get something down that will allow me to stabilize for next turn? The better path here may have been playing Wildborn Preserver and then playing something else to just allow me to get it bigger for next turn, but I also think I'm just too far behind. I'm assuming they have some type of interaction, or they'll have some way to get in for those last few points of damage, and they're also doing 12 total trample damage, so I have to be able to absorb a good amount of it just to survive there. It doesn't feel good. I'm feeling what it's like just to have someone play the Great Henge against me, and it's not as exciting. They're probably like, oh, they played it, but they also acknowledge or realize, you know, they're thinking, it's too little too late, my friend. Better luck next time. But I want to play it out. I don't want to just give up. I don't want to, you know, quick concede, but then they just kill me with Bonecrusher Giant. Good game. And then this last game that I'm showing you is actually the first game I recorded, but it was the game that made me feel like I'd actually built a deck worth sharing. It's mono green versus mono green, which it's the only mono green deck I've played so far on Arena in this standard season. So I was actually really surprised to be like, hey, hit the record button and look, another mono green deck. As you'll soon see, they did a lot of things differently in their build than I did in mine, but it also made me feel confident, so you may be able to assume what the ending is. But this reassured me that we aren't just stuck on that early game aggro, that we can find a way to stabilize against other people that are trying to build out a big board, and then eventually outscale them and find a way to win. Now here they focused down Vivian, which I was a little surprised by. I would have thought for sure they would have just tried to clinch the game and apply as much pressure to me as possible. In this situation though, I realize I need blockers. So even though I can't really play out my Lovestruck Beast to attack, it's a great blocker. 5/5 for 3 definitely helps stop some of the damage from getting through. In the next turn, depending on what we draw, we can play Nissa and just start building out our board, getting the rest of our cards down, and trying to get Nylea out to also help and synergize well with Nissa, using our lands to get us creatures back in hand. At this point though, I'm starting to feel like a little nervous. I don't know how much more I can really take attack-wise like this. I decide to get rid of a creature and hope that we can find a way to just stabilize. Draw the land wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, but I was kind of like, I'm not sure what I'm going for here. I think Nissa's the best bet though, because I'm able to play it out, start using my land for some really fun and good stuff. I'm trying to figure out two here. Maybe they're just stuck on lands, or if they have a combat trick to find some way to break through. Of course, they have their Great Henge, which I realize has a sweet synergy with Growth Chamber Guardian. Just helps them find all kinds of good cards. And it made me realize this is the game that also made me realize I'm not playing any of Castle Garenbrig, which hasn't really been an issue so far, but it also makes me realize that I clearly overlooked some very obvious things when building a mono green deck. But that's alright. We changed it in the earlier part of the video. It's in the deck tech and in the deck list now. All's well. Thankfully though, we draw some good cards. Nylea's helping us hit some more creatures. And at this point, even though they've been able to get some pretty good card advantage on us with the Great Henge, with their Growth Chamber Guardian, we have the bigger board, and we now have the inevitability from Nissa. So if they want to try and shut Nissa down, they have to attack and kind of expose themselves in some way or lose some creatures. And I'm happy to make that trade at this point, because hopefully with Nylea out, we can also just find bigger and better creatures than them. The one issue though is they are getting a super wide board, and we're at 7 life. So we're going to have to use the Gilded Goose and the food tokens to help us just buffer our life total a little bit. I also really like the synergy with the Barkhide Troll. Get an extra counter, helps him make him. I'm not actually sure how valuable that is in Standard at the moment, just because of how much it's more like board wipes happening. You aren't doing a lot of direct damage, I guess, unless you're playing mono red. I guess it's super helpful against mono red. But then I feel really confident about this game once we get our Great Henge down as well, because we have so much mana. Every creature we do end up finding gains us life and draws us cards, and we're going to be able to outscale our opponent, especially once we can ult Nissa and get all of our force out, make these bad boys indestructible. They're not going to be able to break through us because right now they haven't shown any trample in their deck, and we now have shown a creature that will continue to scale with essentially every other creature in our deck that comes out. Now, I'm not sure exactly what their win condition is, if it's just go wide and use those synergies with the Great Henge. I was excited to find out, and then they just kind of scoop. So there you have it. That's Mono Green Feast. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons. Thank you to Card Kingdom. We'll see you in the next video. Take it easy. Peace.